All right, hello everyone. Welcome to episode 14 of the Lounge Podcast. Today we have Lester, uh, Lester Kite,
Yeah.
oh, okay,
Hello.
and we got Beat as well. So yeah, so we got like
Oh, there.
yeah, four of us here, and we today got a topic that it might be actually might be pretty interesting to go through. It's squash fights in fiction. So I guess since it was your question, Lester, if you want to introduce us to guess the topic and what squash fights are and that'd be awesome.
Okay. So in sorry. Someone
Oh,
tried-
wonderful.
Water. Oh shoot, that's good.
Thanks so much for coming, Dark.
Yeah, hey, I
Hello there.
tried to join today.
Oh, okay,
Thank
awesome.
goodness.
That's good. Yeah, because well,
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, we was just saying there was questions we wanted to, there's certain topics we want to cover. Obviously, we wanted like a female perspective in it, but we'll get to that hopefully after squash fights. So, but for now, just Lester was just about to introduce what squash fights are, and then we'll get into like the meat and potatoes of that. So, yeah, you take away,
Okay.
Lester.
This is like particularly prominent in say something like a shonen anime and shonen manga, which is something I've taken a lot of inspiration on. Squash fights essentially refer to a one-sided battle where it's not just like a close defeat. We're talking about a mountain between the two fighters, and this is specifically towards the antagonist, essentially destroying one of the protagonists. But it's not in a way that's, in a way that's not just like it's done and there. It's then sort of will then either push like the plot forward or motivate the particular character into a path into a more like defined path. This one of like, and probably like a big example for me, which is going back to, is of course Zoro versus Hawkeye Mihawk from One Piece. So to give you some context, Hawkeye is essentially Zoro's end goal. He basically said right at the start of when he introduced with Luffy, he doesn't care about the fact him being either a pirate captain or whether he achieves this stupid dream of acquiring the One Piece. All he wants is to become the world's greatest swordsman. And it was at the Baratier battle where his very goal appears literally right before him. One of the seven warlords of the sea, Dracula Mihawk, who is renowned as one of the best swordsmen in the world. So Zoro immediately challenges him to a fight, which Mihawk, not seeing him as anyone worthwhile, literally just draws out a pocket knife. But even then, was still able to utterly counter every single blow Zoro had. But when he delivered one strike on Zoro and noticed he still wasn't giving up, he did say, "What? Why are you still fighting? You can tell the difference between us. Why?" Zoro simply said, because if I can't beat you, because I made a promise, and if I can't beat you, then I may as well be dead." Which, in a way, earned Mihawk's respect. So from that, he decided to then finish him off with his strongest sword. It was sort of after that, and the outcome essentially was Zoro was utterly beaten. But instead of sort of running away or like trying to mount another attack, he simply turned to Mihawk and then showed his front, simply saying, "Scars on the back is a swordsman's shame." Basically meaning if you get a scar on the back, it can, for a swordsman, it can mean you had your back turned, you were running away.
You're a coward, basically. Yeah.
This, in a way, caused Mihawk to spare him. Simply said, "It's not your time to die. Find me. get stronger, and then find me. And it was simply at the end of that, like Zoro's like pride was completely shattered. So he made his like very tearful declaration that he will never lose again. And for the first time ever, calls Luffy king of the pirates. Essentially, now he'll be like essentially affirming his loyalty to Luffy to go full hog in both achieving Luffy's dream as well as his own. And this shows that, and from that he sort of becomes basically by default the first mate of the Straw Hat crew. He's sort of he doesn't like act very differently. If you pay attention, there are some times where Zoro steps up to act as his first mate. With one of my favorite ones being the situation with Usopp after Water 7, where Zoro basically put his foot down and said, "We can't let him join the crew if he doesn't apologize for what he did."
Yeah,
and then,
it all kind of stemmed from. Sorry, I guess it all kind of stemmed from like
that one.
Yeah, and I think sorry, just to add a little thing. I think what's another thing that's interesting about it is the so by him when Mihawk, after he beat him, Luffy tries to attack him, and then Mihawk asks him, "Oh, what's your goal?" And he's like, "Oh, to become king of the pirates." I said, "Well, that goal is more lofty than mine." So in a way, it's kind of like the kind of around the time where he swears that he'll become the great swordsman, and realize, because he must have thought, okay, I can get my goal, fix my goal right now, but then realize how lofty that goal was when he realized the gaps in strength.
Yeah.
After that, it's kind of like, not only that you realize that his goal is even loftier than Luffy's goal is even loftier than his. It kind of I lost my train of thought, but like it kind of in a way kind of explains why he's like got so much respect for him. Like I think before he kind of he's got ambition and that stuff, but I think there's probably like the inherent respect of like, okay, my goal is this lofty and his goal is even higher. So if I at the very least, if I can support him, you know what I mean? It's
and that's sort of like one side of a squash fight where it sort of promotes the character in sort of like as like a defining moment. That's essentially what they are. They're sort of defining moments, and they come in like many shapes and forms. Another example I have, like a recent one, is which has sort of become my favorite, is Haseo versus Tri-Edge from .hack GU, which happens like literally right at the beginning of the game. Essentially, it's based on like in like an online game, The World, and it focuses on a player called Haseo, who's sort of taken it upon himself to fight up to kill PKers, specifically looking for one known as Tri-Edge. And he gets a tip that he's in basically the place where he first met him, where he PK'd his friend Shio, who then fell into a coma. Haseo was like, he's not like a low-level player, he's like literally 133. He was essentially, and had some of the best equipment, but against Tri-Edge, but despite all that, Tri-Edge not only literally destroyed all of his equipment, but hit him with an attack and essentially reformatted his entire character, forcing him back to level 1. And it sort of was and then it was sort of when Haseo was sort of rebooting his PC, he got a strange email from my old friend Ovan, essentially saying, "You've got two paths before you. One, never log into the world again and just go on with your life. Two, log into the world and find the truth. But the latter is more torturous than you could ever possibly predict." And it sort of begins Haseo's sort of journey into the world to not only like find Tri-Edge, but then sort of become something much greater. I'll sort of stop there with .hack, because it's definitely something you need to experience for yourself. But that's generally like another side of like the squash fight.
So I wanted to chime in on that a little bit, just to kind of add
kind of like a meta commentary on that subject. Well, if I could sound any less pretentious about it, anyway. So you could say, this is kind of for you, James. It's a bit of a joke. You could say that was the beginning of Haseo's rebirth. You could say, if you're in on the joke. But what I'm getting at is, as far as squash fights are concerned, the way how we normally frame them, it's a typical David versus Goliath affair. We're dealing with someone who is at a higher level than the protagonist, not necessarily strength-wise, but in a level of maturity and understanding. This person has likely reached the height of where they are ever going to achieve in life. And the protagonist usually fits one of two places. They're either trying to take them down for one reason or another, or there is something of a desire for the protagonist to eventually become the very figure that they're sizing up against. So when you have that squash fight, you are reminded that there's still a mountain for the protagonist to climb, but not necessarily a mountain that is defined by strength. I think another interesting aspect to the concept of squashes in general is that fundamentally, I don't really think they need to be brought down to just a level of strength, because sometimes fights can be won in other ways, and it doesn't really just turn into who has the biggest attack, who can knock this other guy down faster. Sometimes it's a matter of wits. Like, you can be the strongest person in a fight, but if your rage is what's pushing you and there's just this raw power, there's a good chance that this person who is smarter than you, who has likely witnessed more than you have in life, is likely going to overpower you. So even if you somehow manage to pull a sword out of the stone, if the person on the other end has reached a point of patience, reached a point of understanding, to the point where they understand the person they're dealing with, a squash fight then turns less into a matter of raw strength, more so now that it turns into a question of philosophy and where this person is in life and what lessons do they have to learn. Since we were using .hack earlier, I'll just kind of keep my example brief. There is a later confrontation between Haseo and Kun that turns into a one-sided affair. Kun, on a practical level, is far more experienced than Haseo and is far more mature. But the thing about that is, Haseo has gotten to the point where he is so ridiculously powerful that he can pretty much curb stomp everyone at this point. But the thing is, that's the point of the game, or rather the point of the story. Haseo gets to the point where he can curb stomp Kun, but the problem is, Kun is doing this intentionally. He is losing to Haseo intentionally to prove a point. Haseo has reached a point of raw strength, to the point where he can overcome Kun. However, Haseo has failed in one crucial aspect: his maturity. Kun has lost people. He's seen what happens to people who get lost in power. So he allows Haseo to go on his rampage and almost kill him to prove a point. So now we have a kind of a weird crossroads here. We normally define squash fights by a concept of just raw power versus raw power, or lack thereof. However, Haseo had the raw power, but Kun in this case has the wits. So, in this sense, who exactly is the stronger character here at this point? Because still, Kun has more experience than Haseo does. He's intentionally making himself the weaker party here. So it just goes to show there's a little bit more nuance on the topic, as far as how .hack handled it anyway, or how I feel the concept can be handled in general, personally.
About this, in fact, it can connect with one of the topics I placed, which was fantasy tactics. Also, sometimes the squash fights can become more about tactics rather than wits or maturity, or most things that are usually placed.
Right, because
in this case,
like,
we have one of those, which was Overlord. Overlord really showcases it. The arc where the where Riku Aganeya appears, because things could literally steamroll him. Could literally just say, "Okay, I passed through," and do a literal curb stomp. But he said, "Okay, I lose. I lose because this way I get more information. Because later on, if he fights them, know
it's
better
interesting. I
about.
think what I'm gathering, because I know of squash fights, but I never thought of them like so directly. But what I think seems one connection, constant with squash fights is where there is there's a big power imbalance, sure, but then I think what's the more interesting nuanced stuff about it is like a great lesson is about to be learned or could be learned from it. So even during the squash
Exactly.
fight or after the squash fight, there's a great revelation of like a lesson of, I think Beat was kind of saying, for example, oh, this strategy triumphs this ultimate power, or in Leicester's case, it's just simply like they thought they had it all figured out and they realized there's so much more they need to learn. So I think ultimately with most squash fights I'm coming to understand is like there is a big kind of lesson, a big epiphany sort of thing happening during or after that confrontation of a squash fight. I guess that's
Because the thing is about how we're defining it is that we can also have the fight as a bit of a stand-in or something of a physical representation between the relationship of these two characters. So the fight itself becomes a conversation. So at the end of it, it's like one person is trying to communicate one thing to the other person, and it is on that person to learn the lesson that is being communicated with them directly or unstated. So if the lesson is for you not to be consumed by wrath and rage, then it is up to the person on the opposite end to either make that obvious enough, or there needs to be a hint that they were clearly pulling their punches. Now, depending on where you stand with that, some might see that as, oh, that's kind of cheap. You're kind of handing your main character a win. Not exactly. It's the whole concept of you may have won the battle, but you're still trying to fight the war inside yourself. So you may have won a battle, but you have fundamentally lost the war that is brewing inside of you at that point.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well,
Like, I
jumping
think
back to the example I was talking about, it's a bit of a subversion in that sense, because what Ains tries to do with giving that win to Riku is literally to make him think that he's stronger than Ains. So he'll get arrogant and attack again without taking care any bad situation, and in the end he'll attack and use that carelessness to his benefit. So it's a bit of a subversion in that sense, because Ains uses the squash fight to learn from enemy, at the same time ensure that they get arrogant.
There's also like the case of like also the one learn whatever like side of the squash fight it is, it's what you learn in the fight. Sorry, I like bringing examples, and this is like a really good recent one I've learned from Vagabond. It's from like the fight between Miyamoto Miyashi and Isshin Honzo, where essentially this was like it was a strange fight essentially because the Miyashi's opponent was basically this monk with this really weird blank face, but essentially his posture unnerved Masashi. Sorry, I'm gonna read his name, Masashi. To the point where his lack of technique really begins to reflect, with even Isshin sort of pointing out, asking him, "Who's your master?" And when he said, "I have none," he said, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Your fighting style's so refined. It's like I'm fighting a wild beast." The more the fight went on, the more unnerved Miyashi got, to the point where he was literally on the ground, beaten to a pulp, with Isshin literally looming over him, about to kill him. Saying, "Thank you for teaching me life." And then when he regained consciousness a few days later, he then realized that he didn't survive because he was spared. He survived because he literally ran for his life. And it was there, with the point of the fight basically being here. essentially the reason why Musashi lost, not because he feared his opponent, because he lost to fear. And that was something that Ishun's teacher actually told him, and then said that's also what Ishun lacks. And so to ask Miyashi simply, I want you to fight Ishun again. I want you to teach him fear.
Nah, that's a really interesting profound one because, like, yeah, realistically,
Yeah.
even if it like public speaking and things like what you're scared of, and you try to do them, like I think
Yeah.
most people are scared of
Because
the things, so that's quite
Trust
pretty cool way of
me,
talking about it.
I know a lot of
Yeah.
as someone like me, I know a lot of fear, and it takes a lot to sort of.
Because
way
now
past
you're
that.
now it kind of now we're kind of veering into a concept instead of just an opponent by itself, which
Yeah.
I leaned into earlier. Like this David and Goliath dynamic doesn't have to be between the protagonist or antagonist. It can really just be between a personal struggle that the protagonist themselves has to overcome, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
fear can and that uncertainty can manifest into something psychological, or it's something that can take physical form depending on what you're writing.
Yeah.
So now you can have a case of someone being completely overcome by this insecurity or just overcome by their arrogance. It really is just a matter of the protagonist having their own Achilles heel, and that can, in just by how we're discussing this, kind of fall into a squash in its own way. If the point of the story is for them to come to terms with these hurdles and how to overcome them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I think sometimes the biggest obstacle is your mind. So yeah, like it can work really well in that squash fight where
Exactly.
it's just like you probably had them thoughts all the time, but then it took someone to pull that out of you, and like you kind of imprint that thought that's been like squandering you the whole time upon them now that they're like so overwhelming and so like powerful or something. So yeah, it can help you look within, not just like at the physical aspects. So yeah, really cool. Cool.
Yeah, I can get behind that one.
Cool. Is
All
there
right.
any closing thoughts you got on squash fights?
Nah, I've pretty much gone through my examples and everything.
No worries.
If I could leave a closing thought on it overall, the way how I'd frame it. You can frame, as we call it, a squash fight in more ways than one. It doesn't just have to be a concept of raw strength. It can really just be a question of the character's own personal journey, what they're pursuing, their insecurities. Like, a battle is more than just the swords meeting or just somebody getting thrown off a cliff. It really is. It really can encompass the mental, psychological, and just pretty much every aspect of a character's very being. So to kind of pit them against themselves as well as someone else, you can do a lot with this idea of just a squash by itself, because it just opens the door for more development. It just means that you have more hurdles to challenge. But you can still have the question of, does a character even manage to break this? Well, you can still have them fail, and you can still have something interesting out of it.
No, yeah, I agree. I was thinking though, because I'm thinking that I do know, like, squash fights. It kind of essentially, it's like you come across someone who helps you look deeper within to something you've maybe been tackling with anyways. But it's then making me think, like, is it possible to have a squash fight without, I guess, at least told in a story? Because I think we all fight in the battles and that stuff. But in a story, in a narrative, it's possible to have a squash fight without having, I guess, a presence or a Goliath there to squash you, I guess. Does that make sense? Like, could you just have?
Yeah, I don't see like any reason why not. Because I think like even because obviously everything, all my knowledge really comes from like action stuff. So I'm sure like there are sports anime and like manga where it's basically it is like the say like a basketball. And there's like this particular player who's basically this mountain for, say, the protagonist to sort of overcome, like able to like shoot more hoops than him.
I think that makes perfect sense because that's that. If anything, sorry. I think that makes perfect sense. I think if anything, that fits perfectly into
Yeah, like
the
even
squash fight,
even like
yeah.
actually
I
like
think-
Karate Kid. I think that's a really good example.
Oh,
Like
yeah, yeah.
Danny
Yeah.
Russo versus
Mm.
Danny versus like Johnny. I think that's like
Yeah,
a good one of
but
him.
I think for
sort
what
of...
I mean is because yeah, that makes perfect sense because it's kind of what we've been talking about mostly up to this point. But what I mean is could you have like a squash fight? I think the only thing I can think about is like having it in something in the mind, but like to tell a story and have something that would be kind of squash fight. Could you have it without having an opponent in front of you to face?
Sorry, you cut out there.
Could you have a squash fight without having an opponent to face? And the only one the only way I can think about it is like having but like showing it in a story. So I think the only way you can think about it is like having like you have your inner tournament, but it being kind of shown in some way. Because otherwise, wouldn't that be called something else? Wouldn't necessarily be called squash fight? I guess I'm just splitting hairs.
You can
might be more of like
no, you can have one
internal struggle
like that.
Yeah.
You can have one like that because I recall there was this game. Now I don't recall the name. Literally, it was that you literally wrecked and squashed monsters that should squash you because they didn't really do anything against you. Yes, now I recall the name of the game, which was the Shadow of the Colossus.
Oh, Shadow of the Colossus. I wouldn't really call those squash. That's a little different.
It's kind of not man versus nature.
Wait a moment and I finish. Because I'm saying that they are really not, but in the end, when you become monster, literally, squash fight is not having an enemy. It's trying to escape the light that will try to seal you. You know that you won't be able to escape it. You will try and will have an epiphany of saying, I fucked up. I fucked up the entire world. And I need to pay the price.
I think what you're trying to say is, sorry, just to understand. I think you mean is like, when the main character he beats the Colossus, but he's kind of he's kind of going into this inevitability of he's become. I'm not sure. I guess he knew. He must have known in it because he kept every time he beats one of them, he gets taken more of their.
Yeah, because I haven't played Shadow of the Colossus. I do see what you mean because essentially you do. Like, the Colossus, like, literally don't fight back. And then what... So, it essentially can be, and it's in the reverse, is essentially what you do. It's really revealed at the end, when you've killed the final Colossus, what you've done was actually something really horrible. Yeah, so I see what you mean.
Yeah, I think I see your point, yeah. Kind of like, I guess the inevitability of the knowing, well, especially in hindsight, knowing like what the actions are bringing you towards is like okay, all right. So since we covered that topic, should we go straight on to the fanfic one?
Yes, I agree. That's the subject that I really, really want to lean on since. Fundamentally, I think fanfic is a lot more important than people realize or give it credit for. Despite the fact that I don't write it myself personally, I know a lot of people who do, and
I did write fanfic, but I stopped because I really found it annoying. I rather prefer to work on my own things, on my own original works. Well, you said that since it was about that girls tend to like it more. Now that we have Twitter, I think that it should be more possible.
Yeah, I could interject a bit. But yeah, I guess how should I start? Like, by I guess anyone else want to speak about it before I talk, or should I just think about my own experience?
I think it's best to
you can get the ball rolling.
Yeah, get the ball rolling, because I certainly don't have anything good, much to add.
I don't have
so
nothing too fun to say at the moment, but I would like to hear just like, I say you
Yeah.
definitely get the ball rolling, kind of hear your thoughts on it, and we can go from there, basically.
Okay, so okay, if that's the case, then I'll get started. So, as you all know, fanfics is just a short version for fan fiction. It's pretty much any form of writing that is based off an existing work. Like what do you call it? Like for example, I'm personally interested in like Genshin Impact, so there's a lot of fan fiction for that. But it's pretty much part of all forms of media, from video games, TV shows, what else? Manga, anime, etc., etc., etc. Just people, in a way, rather than people creating original characters, you kind of use existing characters and you create workspace off around them. At least from my perspective and seeing other fanfic authors as well. This is even if you're not doing something completely original, right? Often people write fanfic either to fill in the gaps for something that doesn't already exist, for romances, whether they're canon, non-canon, implied, not implied. It sort of fills a lot of like not really romantic desires, but more what is not present in a current work. But people say, oh, maybe this could happen or this could happen, and then ideas are kind of created from that. A lot of not all fanfics are based around romance, but I think a decent, considerable amount are. Where for example, one of the major filters on AO3, which is archive of our own, is relationships. So usually those would include the most popular ships of that fandom that you could filter out or not, depending on what you like. At least, in my opinion, I find that rather than writing original works, which I did before, I find fanfiction just easier. You kind of already have a foundation to work with, and you kind of just take the time to play with it a bit.
Right.
Yeah. So, rather, I think starting completely from scratch can be kind of imposing to a lot of people.
Not to mention daunting.
Yeah, exactly, right. I find that difficult too for me. Not that I don't want to write original works or anything, but I find it far easier just to kind of just write something without having to think too deeply with something that I already know rather well.
Because the thing is that you already have a foundation to follow up on, just like you said. So what we have is a situation where all of the legwork has been done for you. You have the established characters, you have the lore, you have the world details, like all of that information is already there for you. So now it's just a matter of like rearranging some things to work out the way you want them to. And the thing is, when you have that level of freedom to do what you want and everything has already been established like from scratch and you don't have to do that yourself, fanfic is really gratifying in that regard, if you ask me. It's like you can literally make a crossover out of anything if you try hard enough. Moreover, if you manage to find an idea within a story that you wish were better explored, fanfic is the vehicle for it. And in some cases, depending on who you ask, sometimes a fanfic might approach this idea or concept a lot better than the original material. Now, I personally don't like going around saying that because I don't like cheapening the work of an author when they really work hard to create this stuff. But the sad thing is that that's not really up to any one person to decide. That really is up to the individual who's reading it. But then again, if you ask me, that's what makes fanfic so fun and I think essential for writers who are just starting out.
Oh yeah, like actually, like pretty much I started off sort of writing by literally just coming up with like these really weird crossovers. I think one of my earliest one was Star Wars, and then I think like Call of Duty and World of Conflict. Like it was a really like weird mix, which I'd basically just write because I absolutely sucked at writing, so I literally tried to do like a Wikipedia style thing of like all my daydreams. And even one of my books, it literally started off as okay, this is gonna be like a Kingdom Hearts thing. I'm gonna try writing that, and it's actually morphed into basically what the first series I'm writing. Yeah, like like, while I will kind of rail on a lot of fanfics on particularly like Wattpad, I would never ever discourage anyone to write them. Opposite, actually, if you're gonna start, I highly encourage you start with like with thinking of fan fiction, because who knows, it can actually lead to something like. I never really know. This is the
Yeah,
only
it
example
definitely can
it is,
get the
and
ball
I
rolling and
cringed
like what you want to do. So
to say it, but oh god, here he goes. 50 Shades of Grey from Twilight.
Oh boy, yeah, yep.
Oh god.
Or after being a One Direction fan fiction originally, before some names were changed, but we won't talk about that one too much, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The less said, the
Yeah.
less said.
Well,
But
The less said, the better in that case, because
Yeah, but, like,
I'd probably ruffle
the
a few
point-
feathers.
Point remains, you can use like fanfic to find like what you want.
I think I got this one question. So sorry with fanfics. I don't know. I think it's quite obvious, but because I don't really delve into it too much nowadays, because I just kind of focus on like just the stories I'm doing. But like, it's definitely safe to say that most of the fanfics out there, besides mostly being probably predominantly women who write them, is also they're more relationship building over world building, I imagine. So
Yeah.
it's more
Yes,
characters
for
that-
sure.
yeah.
Because because in general, a lot of them are focused on romances, right? Or what do you call it? Or like also could be friendships
even
as well.
relationships,
But
exactly,
they're
yeah.
typically
Yeah.
heavily romance focused. Like for example, I'll use Genshin. So obviously Genshin has a lot of very popular ships, especially with the men. But one of the most popular ones recently involves two characters who are Al Haytham and Kaveh. So
Okay, yeah.
they are from the Sumer region. Sorry. I guess the point why they're so popular as of recently is because their dynamic is incredibly interesting. So Al Haytham is like a scholar. He's like very aloof. He's kind of withdrawn. But in Kaveh is kind of like the starving artist who's an architect. In a way, quite a mess as a person, but he's very kind. So in a way, when Genshin created both Al Haytham and Kaveh, they're actually what do you call it? They were made together or
And they're
created
roommates,
together.
innit? So yeah.
They're also roommates, yeah. So, but the point is that when they're created, they're meant to be a pair. Even not romantically, but them being roommates, them having a lot of things about them that allow them to sort of bounce off each other and rely on each other. It's not a completely friendly relationship, at least in Genshin specifically. But in a way, it's sort of like a mutual respect that leads them to arguing over lots of different things. But it's like, what do you call it? You know, the old married couple, they kind of argue, but it's out of good faith, in essence. And because of that, people say, oh, this is like the most cutest thing ever. I want to try to write that because I'll say their relationship is far more complicated than I could describe by myself. I'm not an expert on this couple, but it's like, what do you call it? It's like something really juicy to really sink your teeth in. And the most popular relationships tend to do that. They usually have an established relationship where they have a sort of like a complex background with each other. It's not typically they're not simple. So people have a bit more freedom to try to interpret the relationship in the way they want, adhering or not adhering to canon. They don't have to do that. But it gives them a little bit more legroom rather than something that is like, oh, they're just BFFs. And then there isn't as much interesting things to work with in that way. But yeah, I think people just, or at least women specifically, typically really just love their romances because it's gratifying in its own way. You know how like some people just really like action sometimes?
Yeah.
I think
Right.
for me, like
I totally get it. I think I don't know, my thoughts on the reason why it's more predominant in girls than boys, because I think, don't get me wrong, I mean, think about what if with this character and what if with that character is interesting, but the reason why I think in number wise it's more predominant girls than boys, because I think women are more wired towards relationships or more interested in relationships comparatively to boys. So then when they do see stuff that, you know, with characters who have interactions and have layers to it and stuff which intrigues them, they are the ones who then feel interested enough to actually go out and do fanfics more so than guys. I think it's mainly just because just how different and how we're wired overall, which is the reason why
I don't know.
I don't think it's
I don't think
wired.
that's the case myself, honestly.
Mm-mm.
I think it's a
No.
little bit more complicated than that. Like, don't get me wrong though, there's probably like maybe a nugget of truth in that somewhere, because most of the women I knew growing up, and including the women I know now, they do gravitate towards romance in their fanfic, and of course erotica
not
in
even
general,
romance
at
as well. I
the-
think just
or
relationships
just
in general.
just
It doesn't
relationships in
it
general,
doesn't
right?
have to be
Right.
romance, by the way,
Right.
yeah. Sorry,
Right,
go.
but like I feel that this is something that men can share too.
Oh no,
'Cause
yeah,
the thing
I don't disagree with that.
about most of the when it comes to stories in general, like whether we realize this or not, a lot of stories are founded on relationships between each and every character. Like there's always like a complex web of who knows who feels this about the other. Like most of the compelling stories that we have in our history, or at least the ones that we like personally, usually have characters with very dynamic and layered relationships.
No, I agree, yeah.
So I feel that fanfics are very much a gateway for people to explore another side of that relationship that could not be covered within the time that the story that they were reading had.
Yeah,
So to kind of lean into why I think that it may be popular with women, from my perspective, there are some aspects, like we mentioned earlier, that can somewhat appeal to men more. Like we brought up the whole action thing, yes, but there is more of a sensitivity and more of a bit of an intimacy side of it that women may end up feeling more or experiencing more than men do. Like it's the whole typical women are from Venus, men are from Mars, and I don't like taking it to its logical extreme because I feel that does more to divide us more than it does to unite us.
we're not binary, so I
agree.
agree. Yeah, we're not
Yeah.
binary. It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. Yeah, it really isn't that much of a binary situation. But however, there is something that I feel women are fundamentally just a little bit more attuned to than we are, at least maybe on a societal level, not necessarily on a biological level. But when we lean into this idea of what is this relationship like what could it be like under these circumstances, like what if the circumstances were like this, what if you could move in this direction. So like that's why whenever I read a fan fiction that is written by a woman versus a fan fiction that I know is written by a man, I'm going to see one or two aspects. One, I may see more of an emphasis on a specific relationship. Then over when it's a man, it may be more on the side of the more technical sides of maybe like a fight or whatever.
Yeah.
But like I said before, this isn't necessarily something that is locked off between men and women. I genuinely don't think it's that simple. But 9 times out of 10, that is what you are more than likely going to see. And if you ask me, and this might sound like a bit of a betrayal to my sex or gender, depending on who you ask, but I've just been fundamentally more attuned to the relationship aspect of any story rather than just the physical aspects. Like, I feel stories should engage people more than just on a physical, mental, emotional, and all these other levels. I feel like it should be like a kind of like a
Mix of everything,
cornucopia of
isn't it?
experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I tend to get that way more with stories that are fanfics, or sometimes stories that are just written by women more than anything else. That's not to throw not to throw men under the bus, because again, one of my favorite stories is Legend of the Galactic Heroes, and well, I'm pretty sure that was written by a man, and Frank Herbert wrote Dune. So it's less about me favoring one gender over the other, but it's just that there are aspects of a story that I look to get immersed in, and 9 times out of 10, it's usually a female writer that checks all those boxes for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it though, because yeah, in a way, like what you said is true. Like these, like I guess tendencies or desires are not completely locked by gender. They may be general preferences, whether that is by society or just based on I guess general values that people may have. And I definitely you made a lot of great points with that. Because I actually want to just jump off a little bit off of what you said about
Sure.
like why do female writers sort of fulfill desires that male writers may not? something I noticed as well with fanfics between the genders, right, is that depending on who writes it, right, you will always have a certain type of way of writing things. Um, like I would say with the female one, there usually is a tendency towards relationships, but also there's a lot of emphasis on feelings and emotions, wanting to be
Exactly.
heard out, wanting to be felt. You feel a lot more. Sort of you get extreme. What do you go spectrum? You could sometimes get incredible fear. You could do people who want to break out of repression. There's the general societal norm of women being repressed in society, and that often can not always influence works, but it definitely
That's permanent
can.
through the pages, sort of thing. You feel.
Mhm.
While
Because at
with
that
yeah,
point,
sorry. Mhm.
because at that point, the being able to express ourselves via the written word becomes our one escape from society's eyes. And I think one of the best examples of this, like what Dark mentioned, the Awakening from Kate Chopin. That book, I feel, is probably the best way to sum up this problem, or rather this dilemma. So just to kind of sum it up for people who've never actually read that book, basically, this story is about a woman who basically had something of an awakening while she was at the beach. She starts to kind of see what society imposes onto her and what she ends up doing to end up breaking out of the confines. She becomes a lot more confident, a bit more expressive, and she manages to find someone that she really, really likes because of it. But the problem is that she ultimately fails to someone who was in the same position as her at the beginning of the story, I believe, and she pretty much kills herself at the end of the book because she managed to find the truth of society, as it were, from her perspective, and then living the life as honestly as she wished, she couldn't fundamentally fit in anymore with anyone, and due to that loneliness she just ended up dying at the end of the story. So I feel what Nark mentioned is very much the case when it comes to when you feel a certain way in society and you don't have an outlet to, escape to. Usually the first place people end up going is their writing. That's why a lot of these fan fictions that are written by women come across as very, very emotional and very, very focused on wanting to be had and held, or at least you find some degree of faith and confidence that you couldn't find elsewhere.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree because like in a way like when I originally wrote fanfics, right, it was always sort of to answer a question, but also at my lowest times, it was my way of just venting in essence through a different medium because like like somehow like sometimes like when you're feeling your worst, you kind of just feel this like bundle of like I need to let something out
Need to vent
in a way.
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I wrote a few fanfics that way. Not that they're amazing by any means, but in a way, it just helped me. Like after writing it, I just felt so much better
Therapeutic,
afterwards. It was
basically.
like,
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
very
exactly.
cathartic.
Mm-hmm. And then yeah, so yeah, and I guess I'll also cover the male side a little bit as well, at least with what I observed. Not that we can always assume gender, right?
Definitely
Um,
not.
Oh, yeah, I mean, this is.
I
I
mean,
mean, this.
fanfic isn't the best way to use it. I'll uh, also just use like other forms of writing that are typically done by men too. Like for example, web novels. I'll mention that briefly too, just because I haven't read as many male fanfics to be completely honest. But I guess what I've read is usually, it can be hypersexual. I guess
Mhm.
not that female ones
Yeah.
aren't, but you could tell sometimes that like the emphasis on in
The
sexual
focus on
traits.
where it's at is different. I imagine it's more physical.
Yeah, this is
Right.
it's
Instead of the
not the
emotional.
romance side, by the way. I'm just talking about the
Yeah.
sexual one because, but
Right.
regardless,
Right.
at least when they talk about women specifically, right? Like how men and women see the other gender is different, right? For men see women, it can also be very objectified, which I think is something that a lot of women may not find pleasant by any means, because it makes them feel lesser in essence. Like it makes you feel like you're not worth
Self-conscious
anything.
of it, yeah.
Especially when it comes with your physical traits. And obviously women can do the same thing for guys too. Like we love we typically like handsome guys. Doesn't have to be a guy. Also, people like girls too, or anyone that they may like. But people just love beautiful things in essence.
Right. And it just bleeds
Mhm.
out into our work sometimes more than others. And it can come across as extremely objectifying depending on how it's written or depending on the proclivity of the person who's actually looking at it. Because not to throw any gender under the bus, because I see it all the time. When it comes to men, it's always the breasts, the thighs, and how voluptuous they are. For women, it's always the jaws, the shoulders, the muscles, the abs. Like, I see it on both ends, and I don't
Mhm.
fundamentally see it as an issue when a man does it or when a woman does it. However, though, I feel the line can be drawn when it comes to when we're talking about portrayals, because I can tell you sometimes whenever I'm reading a piece of fiction, not even just fanfic, but as a man, I sometimes go, Jesus Christ, is this how some people see me? Feels like I'm a feels like I'm a walking piece of meat in this place. And then I kind of try to look at it from a woman's perspective, and I'm like, I totally see what they mean. I think my friend and I kind of had this revelation pretty hard the other day when we were watching this one anime from way back when in 2004. Like, there was this one. Okay, let me just put it out there by name. I apologize in advance if no one's ever watched
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
It's the Blood Plus anime. Like the same franchise as Blood the Last Vampire. When I watched it with my friend the other day, we kind of came to terms with a very unfortunate aspect about the show. Haji does not get the best treatment in that show, like, at all. To kind of sum up what happens, Haji is what we call a chevalier. He's Saya's caretaker, and he's also her lover. But the thing is, he deals with so much nonsense. He gets stabbed, he gets pushed around, he gets brutalized. Like, it's clear that Saya does have some sympathy and care for him, and we're like, okay, at least the show is acknowledging that he's getting his ass kicked for this girl often. But then we go to the flashback of how he became a chevalier in the first place. You see, there was a rose that he found, or that Saya wanted, and she demanded that he go get it. The thing is, it was on a cliff, like on like a small little patch of land on a cliff. He gets it, but when he gets it, he falls down and breaks his freaking neck. And after that, he basically gets revived as a chevalier, but his emotions are a bit more stunted in this form. When we saw that, we were like, okay, I think I understand what's going on here right now. It just feels like Haji at this point is less of a character and just someone who only lives in service to Saya. Now, in fairness, he says that's the role he's supposed to play. But when it comes to the fact that he's probably one of the most sympathetic characters in the show due to his backstory and due to how much abuse he ends up taking in every other episode, it gets very hard to feel bad for Saya in any meaningful way, because Haji is usually the one who's taken the most bullshit from people. So when I read some stories where it just feels like the man is just kind of there to take abuse and just there to make a girl's day a bit better, and he's just left there suffering, which, by the way, this gets even worse when the show ends, because Saya goes to sleep for at least another 30 years, and Haji is doomed to wait for her until she reawakens. That's pretty messy when you put it like that, ain't it?
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
That's a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit pathetic.
Yeah, I guess. Because I mean, I haven't seen the show, so I don't understand the context. But it kind of reminds me a bit of. It kind of reminds me of like torture porn or revenge porn.
Yes.
They're not obviously the sexual version, but the point is that people I don't know if that's specifically gender based though. I think it could be, but in this case, I feel like he just happened to be a guy who suffers. I think it would have been the same if he was a girl. It wouldn't have changed.
I have to agree on that one.
So just to be clarify on that, just because some things could be based on gender, right? But in this case, it's very specifically torturing a character for the sake of torturing him. So that's why it didn't matter whether he was a girl or a guy, but more that his role required him to have that backstory in order for people to be sympathetic to him for whatever reason. And then heart goes to him, right? While, for
Definitely.
example, if it happened with the other way around, for example, if the guy told the girl to get the rose for him, right? Or get whatever thing, right? Not that would have been much better,
Wouldn't have
but
been much
it would
better
have
at all.
been, it could have been seen as possibly even worse because the character was female. But
Mhm.
in that the guy, oh, maybe the guy could take more abuse, just abuse him more, right? But I do feel like at the very least, I think it's harder to torture someone, what's it called, if you feel sympathetic towards them. I think that's, or it's meant to cause pain. I don't know, sorry, I didn't really go into that really well.
I
But
know,
it kind of reminds you of that. Oh, sorry, keep going.
No, sorry, no. I want to say, I don't know. I say, because I didn't watch the show, so I'm just thinking about all the pieces I keep picking up from it. I'm not sure exactly everything it goes through. Besides, I guess it seems like the relationship's a bit messed up, but it seemed that because he kind of chose it, it's a bit like of a.
But you
Like,
see,
although
that's
it's
the
not good.
weird thing.
It's not good, but I guess I guess he said he stunned it, so maybe he didn't got fully. I don't know. I guess it leaves it's a bit of moral dilemma, I suppose, at the very least.
Because it's like it's not as though the character didn't have some agency into his fate, but the thing is, when he was revived and this is the life that he's living, it just bothered me the more I watched it. Like, what's the word? I mean, my friend had a very specific term for it, and I wish I remembered what it was. But the more we watched it, the more we were just getting frustrated. I mean, granted, if you reverse the genders, it would still be really, really bad. And depending on who you ask, it would probably be a hell of a lot worse, depending on
Yeah,
who you
so
ask.
certain circles, I can imagine that wouldn't go very well at all.
That would not fly well if things were reversed. I'll tell you that. But that's not to make any gotcha points or anything, because I ain't feeding that side of the conversation.
Oh
For
no,
1
I
second.
think it's just I don't know. For
Yeah.
me, it's just
Yeah,
it's just reality of the differences between men and women and certain things, which is fine. We all have we all have our struggles and all have our advantages, but they're not exactly one for one. So they will look
Right.
different. So unless you really check these things, or just I don't know, it'll be hard to see. But yeah, but it's fair to say that because some people might think, oh yeah, it's just like that, but nah, definitely not.
Right.
Yeah, it's like because whether I guess because in general anime, right? Like overall, it is in general like a very male orientated
Media.
industry,
Yeah.
heavily male. I don't remember exactly what Blood Seeds. I don't know who created it or what they did or anything. Could even have a writer who's female. For whatever, or like whatever happened to that character was just for the sake of the plot, right? But I guess whether we like it or not, at least on the anime side, it definitely can cater towards men more. To a point that women can feel uncomfortable. Like, I mean, if I watch whatever happened with that character, like I would feel bad just like anybody else, because I think just seeing someone go through such a horrible thing can just make anyone feel sympathetic towards him. It doesn't really matter the gender, or like it could I guess not to like make you like lower your point by any means, but it does I guess feel like a form of torture.
Right.
And it could be for the sake of the plot, or it reminds me of another show where I think if you heard about it's a isekai where involving a healer. The male character's a healer.
Oh,
right?
redo of a
yeah.
healer.
And
Oh,
you've heard of it, right?
Oh,
Yeah, I heard of it.
Yeah,
Oh,
that one,
boy.
right? I've never watched it, by the way. I've only heard about it because
I've only
I knew
seen
that if I'd
clips
watch
of
it,
it is
I would hate
wild.
it completely. But
Oh,
but
absolutely.
it does show though that at least the fact that it exists and has an anime in itself, I think shows that people can think that way, or can at least have that idea in order to make it conceptually real, right? Where people I guess he was like, I guess the idea, what I remember is that he was, when he was isekai, right, he had a very, very, very bad experience with women, just in general. And due to a variety of reasons, he was able to turn the tables and do the same thing back. Not that it's anything
Yes.
or anything, but
It's
I
like-
know the general plot of it. I'll be honest.
Dude, it's
Even
that
as
with
a
coping
man,
mass of
it
edge.
is-
Sorry, I need to talk about it.
It
Very.
is highly disturbing.
And it's
that
like
is also like just general it is absolute trash. I will.
because
That is like one show I will utterly trash.
because misogyny is very much a thing, but on the opposite side there's also misandry. But it's never a question of whether or not one thing is more misogynist or one thing is more misandrist than the other. It's just a simple fact that no, these concepts do exist, and it is possible to explore them in a manner that does make sense. It really is, because I
Problem
think
is that show doesn't.
Yeah, because the
do it
problem
in
with
any
it
mature way.
Yeah, that's the problem with it. It's like it has the subject of misandry come up, but it doesn't do much to address it. Instead, it just turns into this bit of a sickening revenge porn in its own way. And again, a story like this can have merit depending on how it's told. I'm not railing against the existence of it. What I am railing against, however, is the execution. Because there is a point to be had about the subject of misandry and on the opposite end on misogyny. Both of these subjects and hatreds kind of stem from the same place in their own in their own specific way.
Yeah,
But the problem is exactly they're two extremes looking for a place to roost, and ironically enough, the people who are guilty of both tend to be more in bed with each other than the people who aren't. That's the funny thing. That really makes you think for a second, don't it? Really makes you think for a second.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I think from what I understand with Redo Over Healer, I don't think it's really meant to be taken seriously as that, which is not really doesn't really take out of being a really terrible show, but I don't know. It just seems like edgelord with this theme on there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
I find is
like I even bring up like Shield, the first episode of Shield Hero. It's sort of what really turned me against. Like there's a lot.
That's
of things
pretty
I
bad.
don't
It's
like
not,
about
but yeah,
Shield
it's
Hero.
not bad. It's not as bad as Shield. It's not a bad thing, but yeah, I can see your point.
I take issue with particularly the first episode and why I generally don't like Neofumi. I don't know. It just comes off. It either like comes off as immature or it just completely misses the point.
That I think
the best I can describe that.
Shield Hero definitely toes the line of being like edgy. Because I watched the first season, I would say there was development there. Season 2 was dead. They made him to because I guess what you had the issue with season 1 was the main character was a bit unredeemable. But then I think through season 1 he kind of grows up a bit. Actually, he actually grows up a bit. So there's development there. So in my head it felt like, well, okay, we had him there so he can develop to be a better person.
Yeah.
But then I think season 2 just
I
didn't even care for it. It just got a bit boring.
It's just execution, and for me personally,
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit.
That's a good.
I've just got the anime to go on. I have no idea how the book's written, but
Yeah, me neither.
the anime. It's just like in terms of writing, it's just the execution of it just comes off as
It is a bit ham-fisted.
Right.
It is really blunt and ham-fisted.
Which kind of brings me back around to like the fanfic subject in general. Like, you will notice these trends also in fanfic. Like, what I think gets a little overlooked here and there is fanfic tends to get the bad rap of just because it's fanfic, we can't really take it seriously as like an actual piece of written work. And the thing is, I just think that's the worst shake you can really give to fanfic, because a lot of the same problems that you can find in high budget productions, you can also find them within fanfiction, and that's not really a strike against a production by itself. It's just the concept of writing in general, if you ask me, because the ham-fisted nature of things within Shield Hero is something that you can find in any old fanfic if you know where to look. You can find it there too. What I really think we ought to advocate for is not necessarily the idea of walling off the strengths and weaknesses of fanfic within its own corner. I feel it needs to be treated as its own specific section of writing in general.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because like as you mentioned, there is that stereotype that exists, right? fan fiction is inferior to other forms of writing because it is pretty much based on existing work. It's not original. It uses existing characters. It can obviously be canon, non-canon. There also is the whole policing with ships, which I won't go into. That's its own can of worms.
Yeah.
But that can be mentioned another time. But regardless, I think recently, at least with COVID, I do think that the belief towards or the stereotype against fanfics has gotten slightly less just because the online space has become a lot more open and people do feel generally free to write their things. Sometimes they even do it on social media in the form of like
Right.
Twitter threads, for example. But it doesn't change though that the difference between I guess fanfics versus original works, right? When people write fanfics, right, they're not paid to write fanfics.
No.
They just write it because they generally care about something, want to express something, they want to convey their sort of feelings about something. It's not that even that the fact that they're not paid is the most important part. The most important is that they do it because they genuinely care a lot, but they aren't able to show that otherwise. They may not have the ability to, for example, become published or become write their own books or work on like a TV production. Like those opportunities may just never happen in essence. But through
Exactly.
fan fiction or posting on in the world online, whether through AO3 fanfic or Twitter, it still gives them that outlet, which say, hey, I want to express something. I hope that people may read it and we can comment. But I'd appreciate the most important thing is getting that reception if possible, but also just the act of writing itself.
Right. Despite how easy it is to get cynical, I really do lean towards a concept of art for art's sake or just writing for writing's sake because really I think we're a lot happier as a people if we're able to express ourselves in a way that makes us feel happy. Now, granted, I'm not saying that you can't critique that person's work. You certainly should. But at the same time, though, what kind of world can we be if we're at a point where we're going to have to keep stifling our ability to create and write because, oh, it's fanfic, so it's not valid, or, oh, that kind of story is not valid? Like,
It's a bit short-sighted. It's like, you understand, I think everyone's passion for like writing most of the time comes from watching other things. So if someone wants to probably be close to the source and start like drawing inspiration for it a little more directly, like who's to stop them? So it's like, I don't know. I think some people, I think that kind of conversation is more just about people who kind of see as, oh, if you're not doing things for a career to get money, what's the point, sort of thing. That's what it feels like. More leans towards. And then they think, oh, fanfic, you can't make money from this, so why are you even starting with that? You should at least try and make your original book. It's like, well, no, not necessarily. Some people want to write.
And for the longest. And for the longest time, I've kind of had this opinion that there is a very thin line between what can be considered fanfic or what's just considered just regular story works at this point. Because some of the most influential stories tend to come from people who were genuinely fans of a product, and then they end up joining the production team for the particular property. At that point, do we still call that fan fiction? Well, no, at that point we call it official work. However, it was done and created by a fan. So do we stretch the definition of fan fiction to encompass that? Because if that's the case, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing: do you know how many works out there would be classified as fan fiction if we ever did that? Do you know what we would have to call fanfic for that? We would have to call Fate Zero fan fiction. We would have to call Melty Blood fan fiction. We'd have to call pretty much any Fate spinoff that wasn't done by Nasu fan fiction. And we're not going to do that. Do you know why? Because I think we can all admit that trying to stretch the definition that far is a bit ridiculous. But at the same time, trying to reduce fanfic to that border of you can't really get much out of it just kind of feels reductive. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff gets produced and created by fans who were really big fans of a particular property. Now, of course, some people are in their feelings about Dune, like the ones that were written post Frank Herbert and everything. Some people may call those fan fictions, but I'm of the opinion that those books are just as valid as the originals. They're just probably not as good. But that just and of course we certainly can't call Berserk's future the Future of Berserk fanfic either, because we know the person behind it was close friends with Miura, and he even admits that even though if he ever finishes Berserk, it's going to forever remain incomplete.
Yeah. So,
It's incomplete,
Yeah.
but it's not a what's the word for it? It's not incomplete. I mean, it's incomplete, but it's not what we would call fan fiction. And guess what? Even if it were, I don't think it would be any less valid.
Yeah. Same rule of time. Then last 3 books weren't done by Robert Jordan. They were done by Brandon Sanderson. So yeah, exact same sort of boat really there. And also I think for me, funny thing is like, I don't know about you guys, but if someone wrote fanfic about my stuff, I ain't complaining.
Oh, definitely.
I don't care what it is. I'm like, that's a straight W.
I mean, my teacher, the one I'm always talking about, she actually wrote a fanfic about my work.
Oh boy.
And get this. Are you ready for this? I acknowledge it as canon. That's her character, the character that I wrote that's inspired by her, the events of that fan fiction are canon, and they play a massive role in the first book. I liked it that much. So when I went to rewrite it, I made it a point to incorporate aspects of that fanfic because it was just that freaking good. I can't help but feel that fanfic in and of itself is a lot more useful than people realize. Now, granted, again, the reason for the stereotypes, I understand why they're there, and I'm not gonna be the person to tell you that fanfic is 100% perfect. But it's a lot more beneficial in so many ways that I don't even know where to begin, because someone can find a pulse on your story that you yourself might not have. And if you can incorporate that in a way in which it makes you feel proud, or you feel that you can get something out of it, I say go for it, man. It's awesome. It's freaking amazing.
No, that's really cool. It's bring it full circle in that regard, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Because whether we like it or not, like, fanfics are definitely a good starting point for people to get into writing in general, and should hopefully just continue to be like a place where people can express themselves and not feel afraid or like saddened by it in general. Like for example, I don't know if you heard about this, but have you heard that fan fiction has had a lot of censorship lately, or what do you call it? It's like, well, not really censorship. It's like I think I've heard it's something involving the website where they had to sort of cater it to a certain audience and some. I don't know exact details, by the way, but that's because of that. A lot of people ended up going to AO3 because.
I heard of that exodus not too long ago, actually.
Yeah, so it's not completely recent, but the fact that that exodus existed was because people didn't feel that they expressed themselves properly on fan fiction. I think especially with more things that are slightly more explicit, because I think what fan fiction had to do was that they had to sort of adjust their policy to avoid anything that was too explicit, I guess. From I don't know exact details,
I
but
don't know.
that's
I don't know. I guess because it's the first time hearing this. But my thoughts are, why would they do that now? My thoughts are, is it because possibly because bigger companies are getting more aware of the reputation of how their IP and property can be perceived by smaller people like fanfics, and maybe there's a push from up above. Is this just a throw? This is just from little information I understand. I don't know. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it could also be them trying to monetize the site.
Right.
And they have to get some sort of
this has been a problem for a while for a lot of platforms. Like, a lot of the not safe for work area has been getting hit many times over. Like, we saw this as far back as the Tumblr exodus to Twitter. Now we're seeing it for DeviantArt, and due to that, a lot of people are fleeing to places like Pixiv and other places that are a little bit lax on it. But even then, eventually, the axe does come for the not safe for work artists a lot faster than everyone else, and I think it's fundamentally unfair. I mean, listen, like I always tell people, I'm not a prude, all right? People who hang out with me long enough know that I am the farthest thing from a prude. I make my own NSFW pictures on a regular basis, so whenever someone comes by and they tell me that they're planning on migrating from a website because of what's happening, I always feel bad for them. Because the people that they should be going after for breaking TOS, those folks never really never really get the hammer like they should. They're normally left to fester, and then whenever the website wants to deal with the problem, they simply apply a shotgun solution and it hits everyone. And I just think it's wrong. And when it goes down to the written word, I have an even bigger problem with it. Because whether we like it or not, I mean, I don't really like crappy erotica as much as the next person, but for God's sake, people should be able to write whatever the hell they want at that point.
Exactly.
Just they shouldn't have to like live in fear of their work just being taken down because a website wants to be more quote unquote family friendly. I hate to be a Wild West internet user of the early 2000s and some part of the 90s, but the internet is never going to be family friendly. That is never going to happen. I am so sorry.
Yeah, as much
That
as they
is-
want to say otherwise.
It's
Because
never.
oh yeah, sorry, keep going.
Oh no, you no, go on.
Yeah, because I wanted to mention specifically about AO3. So something I was keeping an eye on recently is that one of the most popular fanfic writers for Genshin was that she's actually a lawyer by trade, by the way.
Badass.
So what was interesting was that she was observing something about like AO3 has like their board of executives, right? It is not like obviously this site is free to use, right? You don't have to pay anything or anything. Like they do accept, donations via whatever means they may have, right? But they do have this like executive board that sort of helps maintain the site, also protects it from any like attacks from other places. Like I think a while back there was attack by like Russian hackers or something for whatever reason. I don't know. Like that stuff happens, so they're like the ones in charge. But something I noticed was that when they try to elect a new person to that executive board, right? At least in the past year or two, someone always joins who tries to be elected, who is pretty much very much for censorship against explicit. It's like exactly against what you would want in a person to actually be part of this type of website. It's like, oh, I don't want NSW. I don't want or like I want things to be more towards what I want. It's like against pretty much against like writers' freedom for whatever reason. And you don't even know if that person even likes fanfics. Maybe they just want like a power trip. I don't know. But regardless, like I noticed that the fanfic I mentioned was like, oh my god, like she read through all the profiles of all the candidates, right? And she was like, this person's bad news. Like if the person is elected, then bad things could happen to this website. So she pretty much just spread the word as like, hey, this person doesn't have a good stance for their position or to join this executive board. Just spreading the awareness. Let people know about it because otherwise, not everyone, like even for like presidential candidate, not everyone reads, all the details. So just having the person like read them is like, hey, take a look at this, check it out, and try to spread the word, okay? And eventually, obviously that person wasn't elected, but I think just having that knowledge and that people do care enough to do that type of thing.
Yeah, it seems like does it keep happening? Like the next person to bring in is always kind of someone like that. Is that what's happening as well? Is it just very recent?
No, it's just like out of the group, like out of the group of candidates, right? I feel like at least in the year or two, there's like a person who's pretty much against like what a lot of what fanfics stand for. So it's kind of weird that they're trying to do that to kind of spread their own. They're like, oh, I guess I want to do this to spread my own agenda, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, that the old that old talking point. But at the same time, though, I feel that is not an invalid statement because fundamentally speaking, if you ask me, anytime an agenda like we're describing it comes afoul of someone's ability to express their work in a creative, healthy manner and all that, yeah, I have a huge problem with that. I don't like that at all. Because, like, again, I think the main problem again is that, listen, all right, I'm just gonna come clean for a second. I used to post on 4chan, okay? So I kind of have a bit of a Wild West mentality when it comes to a lot of things. I mean, I'm a bit more stable nowadays, but I am still of the opinion that, listen, if you want to post your fanfic, post it. Just do it. Like, if someone reads it, gets butthurt over it, then let them comment and complain about it. But if we're at a situation now where NSFW stuff or this kind of content is just going to come under fire and it gets pushed more underground. Yeah, that is bad. That is really, really bad. And I feel the perception of fanfic is just going to get a hell of a lot worse if it gets pushed underground. Because when it goes underground,
sorry, like, because it's for mainly not safe for work stuff. Is it mainly fanfic? Because I'm thinking, wouldn't that, if it's just not safe for work stuff, wouldn't that affect fiction, like actual like non fanfic stuff? So it'll go.
That's the problem.
Yeah,
it's because like if we don't have a definition of where this begins and ends, what affects fanfic is going to end up affecting other people's written works sometime. It always starts small before it starts to get big. And I don't want to have to quote 1984, but for God's sake, first they came after the fanfic writers, but I was not a fanfic writer, so I did not speak out. But then they came after me, and then there was no one to speak for me. So I'm just saying, people.
Exactly. No. It's just that usually starts. They take an inch, and then you give them an inch, and next thing you know, it just snowballs. And then before you realize it, everything's just gone. Yeah, it does definitely can happen. Like
that kind of thing just bothers me, and again, it just doesn't give that side of writing any favors. Like like I've been making my thesis statement since the beginning of the conversation. It's a valid form of writing, and it should be treated that way. And I got into it earlier with someone who about the writer's strike, and I told them the same thing. This isn't just about quality by itself. Don't get me wrong. I want quality story and quality writing, but we also need the freedom to actually have terrible stories running around too. It has to...
Listen, yeah, exactly. Otherwise, how are we going to improve? You know what I mean? It's
exactly.
It's such a weird mindset. I think some people guessing that when they're doing that, just I guess being general, the approach is being ignorant of the journey and thinking about just the destination.
Exactly.
Like, well, it doesn't work like that. You have to get to that.
It really doesn't, because every era has bad stories or bad storytelling somewhere. Just because we can point to specific cases doesn't mean there isn't a bunch of obscure good or obscure bad. I mean, I would rather live in this world where we're free to put out what we want rather than some holy overseer being all, hey, this is the only one that passes just by merit. I hate to be the person who wants to say screw the Oscars, but sometimes some Oscar winning movies do not deserve it. They're not the best.
I agree on that too.
I mean, it took them over 50 plus years to realize that Citizen Kane was worth something. That should tell you everything you need to know. You can't rely on a big overseer to tell you what is good or bad. You have to determine that for yourself. So when people want to talk about...
I determined that when they didn't put Inception on, but that's personally my opinion on that. But anyways, sorry.
I don't watch movies, so...
Oh no! I'm not just talking about movies here. I'm just talking about writing and stories in general. I just see movies as another form of storytelling, and like I see media and storytelling all under the same bracket. It's just the medium that makes the difference.
I actually want to talk about. Could I jump off of that, by the way?
Sure.
So something that what you said reminded me of. I think mostly two things, right? One, I think you made a good point about the writer's strike. I think pretty much most people agreed with the strikers. I think at least people who are, I guess, more liberal. I guess I don't know exact political terms, by the way. But when seeing that they did win and were able to get the rights that they deserved, it was very gratifying because, in a way, writing is often very underlooked. Like the people who write the scripts, the people who do the planning, who do the dialogue, like it's so much more important than people realize. But it's so undercut sometimes that you don't. It's something you don't typically think about, but is fundamentally important. Where I'm just glad that these people get what they deserve, because in general, creatives are already often put under the bus for a variety of reasons. Because their work is like undervalued, or it can be seen as subjective. but it doesn't mean it doesn't have any value.
Yeah, I think it's not,
or shouldn't be
think,
valued
yeah,
more.
I think
you
it's
know?
not just because it's under. It's not just because it's undervalued. I think it's because I guess art is subjective. There's that, and then two, you're talking about artists who are going into business with business people, so they have an artist mind about it, and they're just like most of them I imagine are just glad they get the thing out there. Unless they're more business savvy or a bit more have done this for a long time or built up a really good portfolio that business people can see and say, okay, you're worth something. You're just going to get the minimum they can get away with and move on. And I guess because artists being an artist is his own hat in its own right. Being a businessman is another. It's a totally different hat. And I can't imagine a lot of artists are really good with negotiating. I wouldn't be surprised if that's another part of it. But yeah, so I think I think it's a combination of a few things along with just art being quite subjective that caused it.
Yeah, and then I'll quickly mention the other two. So the second thing that what you remind me of was China. China's censorship. So it kind of reminded me of how, like, for example, with Genshin and just in general, China does, everyone knows China's censorship, right?
Yep.
Against
Pretty
LGBT plus, pro male, against
Oh,
femboys,
Oh yeah, they're very strict and stuff. Yeah.
blah blah blah. But like those are just a few things. Like, I'm pretty sure it's more complicated than that. But the fact that even with the censorship, people still try to write about those things anyway, even if it may cause them to go to jail, disappear forever, I don't know. But the fact that people do try to adhere towards the censorship, but people also very much could be even because of the censorship that they want to write it anyway, even more strongly.
Because it creates that Streisand effect where, hey, don't do this. Guess what? People are going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Someone is going to do it anyway. I mean, look, I spent my life on an island that was very homophobic by just by the culture in general, and despite all of that, here I am writing a book with characters who are clearly bi, one who is clearly gay, and I'm not afraid to do it. And the reason for it isn't just because I moved elsewhere, it's simply because I just know that these people are real, they exist. Chances are some guy that is in your unit likes guys too. That's just a reality. Sometimes they like both. Those people exist. I don't think there is an idealized world where people of different stripes do not exist. But at the same time, we don't live in an idealized world where people won't find another reason to discriminate against other people. So we also have that to contend with. So when we have a situation where you have all of these attempts of censorship, what it usually does is that it creates the opposite effect, where people are going to go out of their way to do this stuff anyway. Of course, that has good and bad consequences every single time, depending on who you ask. I mean, for God's sake, I was in a rabbit hole a couple of years ago, let me tell you that. But what I think on this matter overall, it's that censorship may come from a government level or it may come from a corporate level, but the free agents out there, yeah, they normally don't have to care or comport to it. So I'm like, if you are genuinely anti-censorship in any shape or form, if this kind of stuff is coming from a corporation or for a government in terms of like the themes that you mentioned, Dark, you kind of owe it to you kind of owe it not just to yourself but to everyone else involved, because if you allow someone to determine what is acceptable for you to be writing within your work without some meaningful degree of analysis or even potential pushback, then we're going to be stifling a lot of people's ability to create. And that's the one thing I do not stand by. I cannot stand by that for a minute.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And sorry, I just want to mention one last thing, but I definitely agree with everything you said, by the way. I just want to mention because I don't know if you guys thought about this, so I will mention it. So something I've been hearing about lately, a little bit because of my work, is in general, the U.S. has been dealing with a lot of book bans.
Right.
So I want to mention that because, in a
I'm in-
way, that
I
is
live in
also
Florida, by the
censorship
way, just so you
as well,
know.
because where I work is against the book bans for obvious reasons. But regardless, the fact that the government believes in banning books because they don't think it's like okay for children, or they think, hey, this book isn't appropriate for whatever reason. I find it offensive, and often those reasons could be, hey, I don't like this book, and then it's banned forever, essentially.
Yeah,
mean,
that risk
down
as
here in
well.
Florida-
I'm not too much about that now. Yeah, I think regards to that, because I think especially when it comes to like, okay, first of all, I think when you come to writing and stuff, I think it is important that we do have autonomy to write. What we want to write in a lot of ways, because I think writers have this. I think one of if there was, I always like to say, if there was a job, I don't think writers we write for hobby, we write for fun. But I think if there was
Right.
if you were to say there was a job that we have in society, is kind of being, I guess, like the magnifying glass, that kind of all reflective lens to society, and kind of putting it in a context that people can say, so people can read it, hey, this is kind of crazy, this kind of this is kind of odd, this is kind of strange. And the only way you can do that properly, or at the best potential, is to have freedom to pretty much write, what you have in mind. Obviously, that doesn't mean everyone's doing that, and doesn't mean if you're not doing that, you're not reaching your goal potential. That's not the main issue. But then also you got to be, I think, mindful of like the people who, because I think the for understand with the ban and the stuff is there are certain books that are reaching kids who parents don't want them to have, and the parents' responsibility is to look after the child. That's how I agree with. But I agree. I can see what you mean by it can lead to a slippery slope. I think with a lot of these things we're talking about, where it's like, okay, sure, you ban this, but then it can lead to a slippery slope where next thing you know, you blinked and everything plus that is gone.
And it may be a bit of an excessive example, I will admit that much, but still, it is worth keeping in mind because the standards of how this usually works tend to get muddied and then used to justify hair trigger banning literally anything that's even somewhat adjacent.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, because I guess my issue is more that in general, censorship is often for control. Control over knowledge, control over what people believe in. For example, I don't know if you heard about this, but in a few states, right? I've heard that, for example, with sex education, right? Often, some schools are going as far as actually banning sexual education towards teenagers. And not that it's specifically book ban specifically, but it could also incorporate those books as well. But the point is that when people censor books, right? Like there may be a few books that may deserve it, right? Anything that is genuinely terrible, that has no educational merit. But when you censor the classics, you censor books that have truly changed the world, that have existed for centuries and have still made very much great contributions to society. You in a way inhibit the children, and you inhibit their ability to learn and think for themselves rather than be controlled by society, controlled by social media. It gives them the point is that whether you like it or not, books do provide a lot of insight into the world, and that's precisely why people have to be very the fact that they're censoring books and removing that choice from these kids, whether to decide to read them or not, is already horrible. It is terrible, yeah.
And of course, just to spring off what you mentioned, the thing is that whenever we do bring up that type of conversation, it then leans into the typical conversations of, well, it's not appropriate, and just to make sure that I can keep the podcast from going too far into the political side of things. But don't get me wrong. But don't get me wrong, though. Don't get me wrong. I'm into this stuff too. All right, just throwing that out there. But just to keep it close enough. The thing is, then it turns into a question of whether or not it is actually appropriate for children to read. And I do feel that there is more than likely that a leg I can give onto that side if you want to bring it there. I feel that you could probably have a conversation there if you wanted to. But here's where things start to get a little bit rocky. If we're at the point where someone can take Assassination's Classroom to a classroom and our Florida board determines that book is not appropriate for school, yeah, I don't like that. I don't think that's cool. That's worrisome. You mean to tell me that an innocuous comic book is being treated as a means to train students on killing their teachers? I mean, I've studied the comic censorship of the earlier eras before we got to where we are now, though, that safety board that gave Marvel and DC so much shit back in the day. I don't want a return to that era for the simple reason of that stuff did not help anyone. It genuinely did not help anyone. The only thing it served to do was to stifle people's ability to create and to come out with some of the dumbest stories, not to mention flat out facelift a book because the standards that they imposed were just that strict. No one back then looks fondly at any of that. And what we have now, we seem to be going in that direction, but even in an even farther place. And we've heard this narrative before where the whole it's time to protect the kids and all that. Listen, I was a part of that narrative at one point. I was a kid at one point, and people were like, we can't let kids play Pokemon because it's dangerous. It makes them worship the devil. There's Dungeons and Dragons. It makes the children worship Satan in their basements. Or God forbid Hillary Clinton's terrible opinion on video games. Like, we've seen this all before, but every single time it happens, alliances keep shifting depending on who's saying it. And that always gets me angry as a writer myself, because it's like a couple of years ago, you same writers were mentioning that this kind of thing is wrong. But now I've noticed that your tune has changed because somebody else is saying it. That's concerning. It just tells me that you don't actually have any principles. It tells me that your principles are determined by who's talking to you at the time. That bothers me. I don't like it. I don't think that's cool, man. I mean, again, there's nuance in the conversation where it needs to apply. I get it. But if you have a hardline stance on one thing and it automatically changes just because the person you're speaking to is someone that you happen to like or agree with by default, yeah, at that point you don't have principles. You just go with whatever the cool guy is saying.
Yeah. It was by that point it's pretty shallow. But I think the more, I don't know, because I'm just thinking like, how would you best even combat something like that? Because it's kind of, because I think you can't go one extreme or another, and I think the problem is it seems like I think the innocent problem, I don't think this is fully innocent. I think everyone's fully innocent in this, but the innocent problem is the people who speak up and say have these weird takes about it, to get rid of this thing, or Pokemon is the devil. It's people who are just generally ignorant about that medium itself. So I'm thinking in my head, get someone who's educated in that. But I'm thinking, is all of every... these things are nuanced. There's probably so much different people saying different things for different reasons, ulterior motives and that stuff. So I'm talking about just the innocent problem. If there was an innocent issue, the innocent solution would just be get someone educated in the medium who has some morals and can say, hey, nah, this ain't that, or this ain't an issue, that should be fine. But then there could be people who just using that as a springboard for ulterior motive, because I'm sorry, like, this is politics. The headache about politics is it's all popularity and it's just about playing games. It's all big game. So I can imagine some of them, they probably know that somebody's medium is fine, but it's just, we'll use this, it'll rile up a crowd and it'll get their attention on you. And of course it will, because and then that's exactly what happens. They'll give a bad take and everyone's like, oh, what the hell, and they get their publicity stunt and they can just do what they want from there. So it's like, some different reasons why different people can do different stuff like that. So it's a bit tricky to deal with overall.
It really it hits us a lot as writers, whether we're aware of it or not, because we have to unfortunately comport not just to the whims of our editors, depending on who you ask, but we sometimes have to think about what consequences we may incur if we do get our books out there. Because at some point or another, some crazy person may find it, and then they may make you a scapegoat of the week. Now, of course, that may increase your sales, though, because you know what they say: any good exposure online is good exposure.
Yeah, pretty much. So
exactly.
could work
but
out.
you still.
Yeah.
but you are still likely going to have to deal with a lot of negativity and a lot of anger from a specific group of people, and that can be a death sentence for most people.
Yeah, especially when you
But
see suddenly you're not being used to that kind of stuff, and it depends how bad that goes as well. There's so much layers and things that can just like be out of your control, and you may not just be emotionally very.
To be honest, that's something that really as a pretty big introvert. That's something that does terrify me.
yeah, like I'm learning how to come out of my shell more, but personally, I just do not like it when the spotlight comes on me for any reason. I do not like that. I prefer to like say my piece, and then I just prefer to just walk out of a room from there. This is why if I ever get my book out there, I am not planning on taking a lot of book tours. I will probably just do like one or two, but I'm not going to make it a point to make a lot of public appearances because people freaking scare me. Like when I found out about what happened to John Lennon when I was younger, I was like, wow, that's really scary. But now that I see what the world looks like at the moment, I'm like, that is hella scary and it is way too real. I don't want it, man. I don't want any of that. I'm like, hey, if you like my stuff and you like me, that's great. And you are probably a wonderful person. But I don't think you and I should be intermingling in the same room for too long because I just cannot deal. And before anybody asks, yes, I go to conventions and all, and I do my cosplay. But the best thing about cosplay is that I am masquerading as somebody else. You're not actually looking at me. I'm just dressed up, so I can blend in without a problem. But me as a physical person going out there as a writer, no, I don't want any of that. Hell no.
I've wanted to get big after the older thing, but I just
in
keep
the
my face
confines
out
of my home.
Yeah.
Not happening. Not this guy. It's not like I can't deal with a crowd. I can. I just can't deal with that for too long. And I don't want a Stephen King situation, and I don't want a John Lennon situation. I don't want any of those.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of drama either. If I can avoid it, I will. And I don't even want to be put too much out there. Not more than it need to be. But
exactly.
How I worked out, I'm not sure how I worked out at this point. I guess it's a really cool thing. We've got like stuff like VTuber and stuff now, so you don't have to put your face out there if you want to be like more consistently public.
That's the best part of the VTube business, if you ask me. That's one of the reasons why, if I am ever going to get into streaming, I'm likely going to go the VTuber route because I don't want my.
Honestly, same because I will not. I do want to. I do want to stream, but I will not show my face to people.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. And being a VTuber is not exactly that difficult. So just let me know if you ever need help with getting into it. I could at least help with that. I do just wanted to do one last chime, if I may, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just before I go back. So just to go back into my original point of I guess with the book bans, right? I'm not going to obviously go too much into it anymore, but I guess what concerns me about it the most is that people will abuse the book bans in order to prevent kids from getting general insight into the world, prevent them from reading classical literature for whatever reason, and in a way inhibit their growth. That I think concerns me the most, and I hope that doesn't happen, but as of right now in the US, there's politics. Obviously, I'm not really into politics, but it is a big thing. And right now, there's a lot of uncertainty it's like, there's a lot of people who pro book ban, a lot of people are against book ban, but there's no, I think, overall consensus over it. Anyone who obviously makes books or creates books will be against the book bans for a variety of reasons, because it could directly impact the titles that you sell.
Exactly.
That's undeniable, but it doesn't change that books are fundamentally pieces of work, and also they can impart knowledge onto people. I hope that doesn't worsen too much to a point of actually impacting the future of children. And I think, especially since children in general are very impressionable, and often, in this digital age, a lot of children don't read as much, to be completely honest. But it doesn't change that there's still books made for children, and they have very much the desire, or will be willing to read it as long as there's that will, right? I'm just concerned, especially since I do have 2 cousins with children, and I'm just concerned that this type of thing could affect where I am, but it could affect similar kids like that in their future.
Right.
So I'm a little
'Cause-
concerned.
And I know people, and I have a friend who deals with writing children's books, or at least making the art for them. And I know that some children's books, like some that are aimed towards like minorities and Black children, those books tend to get targeted because of the pretense of, oh, you're trying to make people feel bad for like, you know, racism and everything. And my normal response to them is this. Okay, all right, buddy. All right, come here a second. Let's talk. Listen. You agree that racism is bad. And they're like, yes. No one is saying your kids are racist, dude. No one is saying that. What is your problem? Why are you getting so bent out of shape about it? Like, what's your deal? I think you have some damage that you need to work out, because that's not what the book is talking about. The book is simply talking about the differences in hair and at least finding some way to be proud of the hair that you have. That's it. It's that simple. And I see these conversations all the time where it turns into it's trying to make certain people feel bad. But I'm like, why are we angling it towards that? Because I hate to be the person who tells this to you, but the world is kind of shit. It's kind of always been unfair, and it's always been mean to people. That's just reality. That's sometimes y'all will tell me the same thing, that the world is just that cruel. And the thing is, you can try to shield your kids from how cruel the world is all you want, but one of these days they're going to go out there, they're going to find out just how mean it all is. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out of your way to completely ruin a kid's childhood. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is that you should probably learn how to pick your fights better. Because if you're fighting against a book that's just telling kids about their hair and finding some way to be proud of it, that's not teaching kids to feel bad. That's just letting them know that, hey, sometimes people have curly hair, sometimes people have straight hair, and that's okay. That's perfectly okay. That's just how it goes. But people will pick the fights in the wrong places. And I feel fundamentally that's really where a lot of these book bans are coming from. People are fighting the wrong things and at the wrong place. And I know one thing. If the book that I'm writing is enough to get banned, I'm going to consider that a W. That is going to be a W, because the moment someone's book gets banned, guess what happens? More people end up buying it. Do you know why we haven't banned Mein Kampf yet? That's why. Because more people will buy it at that point. I am of the opinion that the reason why Mein Kampf is even allowed to still be sold is for us to understand how absolutely pathetic a certain offer was. We actually need to understand these ideas and where they come from. It's not a matter of challenging them or whatever. It is understanding why they failed in the first place. That's why I feel that if you end up banning books like these, you're just going to create that underground market that we cannot control. That's not to say I am perfectly okay with being an absolutely terrible person outworld and all of that, because that does have its own implications. But the thing is, if we have to ban books for anything whatsoever, I just hope it is for a reason that actually makes sense. I am just hoping it is for a reason that makes sense and isn't just motivated by someone's paranoid delusions from what Alex Jones told them. Oops, I outed myself.
Oh.
Dark dropped out.
Oh, I dropped that. I don't know. Okay.
I think she'll pop back up.
She'll pop back up, yeah. I was gonna say something. Yeah, I do. Overall, I think the extremes of these things is where the issues are, because obviously I think in both cases, like I think for me the best place to really go about it is with like the parents. I think at the very least, if the parents get either educate themselves and also get the choice of what their kid gets to read, because they're the one looking after the child at the end of the day, and they're the ones who love them and wants to look after them. Obviously,
exactly.
there's outlines and everything, but
right.
Nine times out of 10, I imagine the parents love their child, and being a parent and had at home they've found a way to survive in this world, so they should be able to instill stuff that helps them get along in the world too.
That I agree with.
They should have the choice and power of what their kids get to read.
Yeah.
And then from there, the people outside who get to who go around banning stuff, they need to be more educated in what they ban if this was an innocent
Exactly.
problem. But I think some of this is just games being played, and they
Oh,
using this stuff.
and you're right,
So,
and that's the thing.
that's
You
the
are
bit,
right
yeah,
about that.
that's the tricky bit. But
Hmm.
yeah, I
It's-
don't know. It's a crazy one. It's a crazy one.
So Dark had to go and had to go and eat. So
Okay.
that's pretty much why they dropped out.
I
So
don't know.
I
Because
think-
here, because it has been a good thing. I was about to like close, like see if I can wrap up like as soon as anyway. So this is like a perfect time
And-
to end it. Yeah,
really, yeah, I'd say so. Like we
Yeah,
covered a
I
lot
guess
of
I
cool
need to-
stuff today.
yeah, that was a really
Yeah, 'cause
killer
I need to
topic,
drop
honestly.
out soon.
Yeah, I was really killer topic. Yeah, thanks again for coming. Beat as well, he was also here, and Dark. I was calling it Water, but Dark. Yeah, honestly, thanks for coming. Thanks for the topic. That was a really good. That was a really juicy topic.
It was
Yeah,
so darn
sorry I didn't have
cool.
much to...
I wish you could have seen me dancing. No, you're okay, James.
Because but it's just like a personal thing. It's like something I don't really like talk about.
No, yeah,
It's okay.
Like,
It's
yeah.
it's fair, James. Trust me. Like,
Yeah,
I
I totally understand.
There's a reason why I never leave. I don't leave my apartment as much as I can.
No,
Yeah,
I totally get it.
Yeah, I'm not too big on politics and stuff too either, so I totally understand, man. Yeah, you know what I mean. Just don't worry about it.
why I live in-
I ain't
That's why
trying
I
to
live in the UK.
I ain't trying to be I ain't trying to be like a political YouTuber or anything. That I ain't about that
Yeah.
grind. I mean, I got my opinions, but I don't feel the need to make any hardline stances unless I absolutely have to. But
Yeah.
if
There's a time and play. There's a time where you feel like you gotta do what you gotta do. But yeah, 100%. Nah, don't worry about it. All right,
I will mention though that if anybody were to ask me what my politics are, I'm just gonna tell you this: whatever pisses the other guy off that I happen to be talking to, that's what my politics are.
My politics is chaos.
Based.
Politics is chaos. I love it. Let's go.
My politics is none at all. I'm staying out of it. It scares me.
It can get scary, but the best way to handle it, if you ask me, is just always with a bit of irony. It does help.
This has been Nathaniel Kite, Shonen beating Dark with hair. This has been episode 14 of The Lounge. Take care, guys, and see you next time. Bye.
See you badasses later.
Bye.
Bye.